10 and 14.
I'm starting it right
We're all
now.
set? Okay. We have about 30 seconds, right, Ken?
No.
You let me go.
Before, I don't know if you can.
Yes, yes, yes.
I think it's more appropriate.
Yes, thank you. Set. Everyone all set? I call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, I will do a roll call of Board of Education members. Liz Flogel, I don't believe has joined us yet. Nora Gatos. Here. Kathleen Holst. Here. Tina Malhotra. Here. Rachel Ruggieri. Here. Sean McAvoy.
Here.
Ken Schoberg.
Here.
Jonathan Steckler.
Present.
And myself, Margaret Stamatis. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our website. Members of the public have the ability to watch this meeting through a live stream on our Board of Education website and YouTube channel. For public health reasons, including social distancing guidelines and space limitations in our Board of Education room, we encourage members of the public to watch the meetings via the live stream rather than in person. Regarding public comment will be submitted in writing through a link which is open and available on our Board of Education website as a pop-up. Rachel will open it now. It will be open from now until the point in our meeting where we get to the agenda portion, which is correspondence to the board. Written comments will be read aloud by Secretary Rachel Ruggieri. All right, moving on to reports. The chair report, Board of Education members will remember from last meeting when I spoke about during the discussion and action part of the meeting, if you can wait to be called on. Some of that is obviously because of Robert's rules. The other piece is because we know the listening public, it's hard for them to tell who's speaking with our masks on. So it's vitally important that we identify ourselves when we speak and that I call on you. Okay, my next comment is about meetings of government agencies during the pandemic and the recent executive order. So this is going to be long and it's a little complex, but I just want to clarify for everyone. As you know, Board of Education meetings are business meetings of the board held in public under FOIA. All business of the board is done in public with some statutory exceptions. The pandemic does not change this. We were allowed to meet virtually starting in March only because the governor issued Executive Order 7B on March 14th, which modified the open meeting requirement of FOIA and allowed meetings to happen in person or virtually. It did not specifically address hybrid meetings, which is what we're in now. On October 20th of this year, the governor issued Executive Order 9H to specifically address hybrid meetings, which are defined as remote participation in an in-person meeting. So it's considered an in-person meeting, and what the executive order allows is for some of our members and participants to actually join us via some virtual method. So what are the new rules? In person, we can still meet fully in person, meaning everybody in person, including everyone up there, if according to the governor's according to the governor's executive order. But that would require all of us in one room, and we don't have a room that's big enough for that, and still maintaining social distancing requirements. It's important to know that the governor's office still recommends that local governmental board meetings be held fully remotely when possible. So you'll notice that other boards in town are meeting fully remotely. They're not in a hybrid, and they're not in person. We can, as they have, choose to meet fully remotely, and that continues to be allowed under 9H. Again, Executive Order 9H specifically clarifies the hybrid, which now is expressly allowed under the executive orders. What it says is that officials conducting hybrid meetings shall make provisions to allow at least some members of the public and press to attend in the same location as the officials conducting the meeting in a manner consistent with public health guidance for limiting the transmission of COVID-19. It also says that we can recommend that the public participate by watching remotely in real time through live streaming. So what that means is, technically, if we had this space, people should be able to come and be a member of the audience, whether they're a member of the public or the press. The issue that we have here is we just don't have the space to do that within the public safety guidelines. So, but that is what Rule 9H allows for. It's also important to know, because I know there was some confusion about this week, is Executive Order 7N, which is the one that puts the limits on indoor gatherings for social and recreational purposes, because I think that that limit is 10 at this point. But governmental agencies are specifically exempted from that. So that is why we can have more than 10 of us in this room together. We are not bound by that same rule. Okay. Some districts in Connecticut have recently started going back to fully remote meetings, especially with the uptick in cases in Connecticut. Like us, they struggled with, if the schools are open, then desiring to have Board of Education meetings that are fully in person. But one of the reasons I know that was cited in a local district for going to the all remote meetings is that they were concerned that with the risk that administrators and staff who would be in the meetings with the Board of Education members, if someone were to contract, one of us were to contract the virus, and then everybody had to quarantine, think of if we look around at the people who would have to quarantine for the recommended amount of time. So there was a consideration to what that implication could be for staff. So what does this mean for us? I think right now we just have to keep our options open and continuously assess the local situation. We may need to move back to fully remote at some point. We just need to be aware of that. For as long as we're in hybrid, we will encourage the public to watch remotely and not try to participate in person. How long will this last? The state of emergency lasts until February 9th, but the governor, I think, is actually starting to review executive orders starting today, November 9th. If the orders expire, the allowance for remote and hybrid meetings also expire, and then we'll have to go back to the way we did business before, where we're guided by our bylaws. Right now, our committee meetings are completely remote and virtual. Again, if this executive order were to expire, we would have to go to in-person for those. Note that we do have a change of practice regarding recording and posting committee meetings. In the past, we had not done that. We had our meetings and they were live streamed, but they were not recorded or posted. Due to this executive order, we are now recording and posting those committee meetings for the public. All right, so I just felt like that needed to be put out there because there's been a lot of movement with those executive orders and meetings, and again, with the uptick of COVID cases, we may have to have some board discussions about what the best way to move forward is at some point, not right now. Next Tuesday, the board members know we have our tri-board meeting. I believe that will be virtual. That is, the Board of Finance should be sending out links that I think they already have, so if you did not receive one, please let us know. Okay, moving on to the superintendent's report.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm not sure if my mic is working, John, but I'll use my biggest voice. First of all, I'd like to announce that Mr. Craig Kreller has resigned from his role as the Assistant Superintendent of Schools as of December 24th. We wish Mr. Kreller well and much success in his future endeavors. Again, he'll be working until December 24th. We have begun the search, and we hope to fill that position as soon as possible, hopefully shortly after the new year, January 2021. We'd like to announce, I'm excited for Jeff Corbishley, our RHS math teacher, also department chair. He has won the 2020 NEA-R School Outstanding School Educator Award, so we're excited for Jeffrey. So for those of you who know him over at the high school, be sure to congratulate him. So we're very excited for him. Alongside those of that bit of excitement, we have our Scotts Ridge and East Ridge students returning to school tomorrow. Couldn't be happier. Glad to have them back. As always, we're working hard to keep students in school for as long as possible, so hopefully their return will not be short-lived. We will be beginning the budget process this week. I guess that's a little bit less exciting news, but it is news, and we'll keep you posted as we go along. I think that's it.
Great, thank you. Next is Policy Committee. We have a number of items from the Policy Committee that will be addressed during the discussion and possible action items portion of the agenda. But we did meet last week and discuss the use of face coverings after the board had its first read and some questions were raised. We also had some discussion around the reporting of child abuse and neglect based on some statutory changes that our legal counsel had recommended that we make. There were quite a few changes to that policy, so that is not being advanced to the board at this time. It will go back to the committee for further review before advancing to the board. And then last is the Personnel Code of Conduct, which we will be discussing later on in the agenda. Curriculum Committee.
We had a curriculum committee on Tuesday, November 3rd, and the group first reviewed the curriculum committee statement of purpose and goals prepared last spring. And then Dr. De Silva presented what her experience has been when working with curriculum committees. And essentially, all curriculum presentations should be presented to the full Board of Education, yet the curriculum committee can work with the administration to anticipate and develop important questions for the entire board. Curriculum updates should be not solely for budgetary purposes, but ongoing throughout the year. She also wants to, Dr. De Silva also wants to share an organizational structure chart that she's developed with the curriculum committee and then the board, since it'll help to clarify the scope and responsibilities of ongoing curriculum work. She believes that a 5-year cycle for reviewing curricula is not the most authentic or responsive model. She prefers a more dynamic model, and she went on to add some how that might happen as we go forward. So some of our next priorities are, of course, searching for the assistant superintendent, not ours, but before we can move on with curriculum work, assistant superintendent and fill the director of technology, and then also share and talk about the thinking behind the organizational structure. And then we can begin the curriculum revision process. I think that's basically it. Anybody's?
Thank you, Kathleen. Liaison reports. I don't think Liz has joined us yet. Kathleen, there was a PTA council meeting, right?
There was a PTA meeting, and I was there, and I was able to listen to many of the questions with great foresight. Dr. De Silva also asked Aaron Cook to be there, because a lot of the questions and dialogue was about what's going on in the schools in terms of COVID-19. And that was basically the time I was there with Dr. De Silva, was a lot of clarification and information.
Thank you. Any other liaison reports? Okay. Moving on to our representative reports. The high school student representative, I believe we have Kate Bucci on. Hi, Kate.
Hello.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so the past week we've had Spirit Week at the high school, which for us that always entails like a social media competition, a food drive, and theme days. So with COVID, it definitely looked very different this year, but we were able, I think, to put on a great Spirit Week for all the kids. So that was run by the student government, who is also currently taking on a new initiative with the school called No Place for Hate. So this initiative is run by the Anti-Defamation League, who we also work with for the Names Day program that we run every year for the sophomore class. And the student government is currently working on making a pledge next week so kids can get involved in the initiative. And basically that's just so we can work to combat bullying in the school and improve our school community. So we're really excited about that. We're in the mix of making a video to publicize that to the community and to the rest of the school. So we're really excited about that pledge. And also, in regards to COVID, I thought I could talk a little bit about how students are taking precautions on the disease and making sure that it's not being spread, because we did have that shutdown. Thankfully, we're back in school, and sports teams specifically have taken a lot of action in cutting down the spread of COVID. I know multiple of the varsity sports, such as like boys soccer, girls volleyball, have all turned to be all remote, so that when they're playing against other schools in competition, that they're not bringing any illness back to the school. So lots of the sports teams have been taking that initiative to make sure that we're keeping our school community safe. Also, students have been cutting down on social gatherings, as parents and administrators have advised, which is, I think, very important that the students are taking that into account, seeing as we did have that little scare a few weeks ago where we were completely shut out of school. So that's awesome. And athletics at the school, the girls volleyball and field hockey team are both competing in FCF finals tomorrow, so there's lots of school spirit going on in athletics. There was also the boys and girls soccer teams and football that had senior nights last week. So I think although we are in very difficult circumstances at the high school with COVID and just a remote year, I think the school spirit has definitely maintained throughout the whole process, and we are just keep working we're just continuing to work as a student government and as a school community to make sure that we are just persevering through this difficult time.
Thank you, Kate. Moving on to the NEA Ridgefield Representative, Steve Ruland.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your time. I'd just like to echo what Dr. De Silva said. Yes, we, as a middle school teacher, we are very excited about getting our students back in the classroom. Probably one of the most surreal experiences I've had in a long time is teaching in an empty classroom. I would never, in my lifetime, imagine I would ever be faced with that. That being said, I'd like to just start off by thanking, we just reached an agreement on a memorandum of understanding between the teachers union and the district. It was a long process. It was definitely one that took a lot of time, a lot of creativity, a lot of thinking. I'd like to thank, Dr. De Silva, Karen Dewing, Rebecca Santiago, as well as the NEA Executive Board and members of the negotiations team to helping us reach a mutually agreed upon agreement. Teachers are doing well. Obviously we've had to manage some schedule shifts between remote, hybrid. So the unexpectancy of which we knew was coming is certainly starting to play out. Where one day you're in and next day you could be out. So it is. Certainly something that is somewhat of a challenge for everybody to kind of stay on top of. The one thing that I will say, and I do want to extend to everyone on the board and administrators in the buildings and Dr. De Silva is, on behalf of the membership, thank you for the time that you were able to get for us to help us make the adjustments that we needed. I can't emphasize enough just how important that was to the membership. It solved a lot of issues for teachers, reduced a lot of stress, and gave teachers the opportunity to start to adjust and make adjustments. So I'm hoping that moving forward, if God forbid we're still in this moving forward, that we can still continue to find ways to allocate time for teachers to, unfortunately now prepare for any type of scenario at any moment. Thank you again, and again, that's on behalf of everyone. And finally, I know it's a little early, but I think this is my only visit this month, so I just want to end by wishing everybody a happy and healthy and safe Thanksgiving, and enjoy it. I know it seems like I can't believe it's here, but it's here, so please enjoy the holiday. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. You as well. Moving on to PTA Representative Gloria Driscoll.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Before I jump into quite a good list of things that PTA has done across our schools recently, we wanted to just take a minute to thank the RPS administration, the building principals and staff, the parent volunteers, as well as local businesses for partnering with the PTA this year. It's been truly amazing and impressive to see the variety of activities, and you'll hear some of these tonight, and events that the PTAs across the district have been able to host because of everyone's flexibility, their creativeness, and their willingness to find solutions during these really challenging times. So anyway, thank you to everyone. So starting off at East Ridge Middle School, the PTA has planned a boy bingo game, costume contest with prizes, and they provided window markers so that each team could actually paint the windows in front of the school entrance. And all this will still take place once the kids are back in school. Over at Stockbridge, they held actually a successful spooky pumpkin contest, which was originally scheduled to be in school, which included the remote students also. But then when the school went remote, they quickly turned it around and switched it to a virtual contest. Pictures were then submitted, and both students and staff got to vote on it remotely. And winners will be announced this week, and the PTAs are supporting prizes for each grade. They will also be assisting with Spirit Week when everyone returns back to school, and like East Ridge, they're also supporting seasonal window painting by students. And they're working with the student council change makers to think of activities that continue to build the community at Stockbridge. Over here at Farmingville, they hosted a virtual pumpkin decorating contest too for Halloween, and each of the winners actually received a gift card to the Brick House Pizza. Ridgefield, they provided several teachers with reimbursements for classroom startup funds. While not all the teachers took advantage of the classroom startup fund option this year, they did have a much higher percentage than they have in the past. On the 22nd, they had their annual Beaver Boogie Fun and fundraiser, which was very successful. They were able to redesign the event to meet the COVID safety protocols. And even though it wasn't done in a traditional way, the kids and the staff members all had a fun, great day. It was a bright spot for the community as a whole, and the kids really had a blast. We're currently running a virtual fundraiser, book fair, and are hoping to use those funds to provide an additional virtual guest author at Ridgefield later on this year. At Barlow, they provided actually 2 virtual interactive author visits for the students. Nick Burrell visited the K1 and 2 students, whereas Raina Helgemeyer visited grades 3 through 5. They organized and provided volunteers for the school photo day for all students, including the remote learners. And they partnered with Dimitri's Diner for a PTA fundraiser. And with some of those funds, the PTA stocked the teachers' lounge with snacks and beverages to show their appreciation. And they also worked with the faculty to promote the first of several spirit weeks that are coming up. And finally, the Barlow Mountain celebrated Halloween by hosting a Bobcat Food Fest this year. They had a virtual costume contest for families that culminated with a video of participants. And in fact, Dr. De Silva was one of the mystery judges, so thank you. Students decorated pumpkins for the pumpkins on parade, and they had 2 days of Halloween costumes. Over at Ridgeberry, they had their first annual Rex Pumpkin Blaze, where Ridgeberry families were invited to place carved pumpkins along the circular driveway at the school's entrance. And the pumpkins were lit on October 29th and 30th, and in the evenings, and the response was great. They had several pumpkins on display, and the families loved driving through to look at all the creative pumpkin designs while, celebrating Halloween in a safe, social distance way. Last week, they had 2 author visits at Ridgeberry. Dan Gutman visited kindergarten through 2nd grade. Dan is known for the My Weird School and Genius Files book series, and Lowry Bundy's Soul is an award-winning children's author who visited 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and she inspired them to change the world with ideas. Her series is actually called From an Idea to Something, like Disney, and it's actually the world's first business and entrepreneurship biography for kids, and she was the founder of the think tank for kids. So right now they're running a scholastic book fair, and they're also doing a Where is Rex scavenger hunt in town. So to kick off the holiday shopping season, they are encouraging families to shop locally. They've placed several pictures of the Ridgefield mascot Rex and several of the local shops and restaurants, and each grade are given a set of clues where they have to find their own version of Rex. And the grade with the higher participation will receive a prize. So, we'd like to thank several of these participating businesses who are offering special promotions and discounts to the Ridgefield families during the scavenger hunt this week. And finally, over at Veterans Park, the PTA donated pumpkins and crafts for the school Halloween party. They're doing an outdoor book fair, and they just finished their modified but really fun Spirit Run last week. And in fact, some of the kids actually said it was the most fun they had at the Spirit Run. So there's some things that they've probably going to do this year that will, be continued to be done in future years, even beyond the pandemic. So great work by them. The PTA approved some mini grants for a new laminator that's going to be used by the school, as well as special microphones for the music teacher to be used both in person and in virtual to kind of enhance the quality of the lessons. The PTA also gave the teachers and staff a new and much needed Keurig for their lounge, as well as snacks and beverages for Halloween. And finally, the PTA is running two virtual enrichment classes. One is a cooking class that's being taught by one of the DC teachers, and the other is their popular social class. So lots of things going on around the district that the PTA is working on now, and hopefully more to come in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you for sharing all of that. All right, moving on to the next item on our agenda, approval of the meeting minutes. Do I have a motion regarding the meeting minutes from October 13th?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the October 13th, 2020 regular board meeting.
Do I have a second? Kathleen? Okay, any comments or discussion? Go ahead, Lisa.
Just to clarify, under correspondence to the board.
Yep.
So there were 3 emails to the board. 2 emails were about sports to the high school, and 1 email was sharing social distancing strategies.
Okay. Any other changes? I had one on page 3. It's in the second full paragraph that starts with Ms. Vogel continued that. The last sentence, all members agreed to the value of the SROs, but not, and I'm not sure what that express word there was for. So I actually thought it probably meant to read SROs, but not all agreed with the need to send correspondence in response to the bill. Would that be more accurate?
That's what I
Sounds right.
would think.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please raise your hand. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no.
Oh, you're voting. You're voting. Sorry.
Just jumping the gun.
I had a cup of coffee.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. All those opposed? All those abstaining? Tina, thank you. All right, the minutes passed. Do I have a motion regarding the meeting minutes from October 19th?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the October 19th, 2020 special board meeting.
Do I have a second? Jonathan? Okay. Any comments or questions? Okay. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from October 19th, please raise your hand. All right, 7. All those opposed? None. All those abstaining? 1. Tina, thank you. All right, moving on to the next agenda item, discussion of possible action items. The first is a reopening update. Dr. De Silva.
Okay, I just want to start off by saying I know that we've sent a lot of messages in the past couple of weeks. The intention of doing that is exactly what we designed, to be as open and as transparent as possible with our school community and the public. We share that out not only with those within our district, but we share that out with our first selectmen, our Board of Finance chair, and the newspapers. And we do that in an effort so that there's clarity and families can make the right decisions for them as individuals or their collective family. That said, I would like to caution the public on hypothesizing around situations. Our job is to protect our children and our families, their health and our children and our faculty and their health and safety. And so therefore we share what we can share. We can't share the evolution of certain situations. And I also want to be cautious in not putting our students or our faculty in a situation where they're feeling defensive or that they've put anyone at risk, because we know that everyone is working their hardest, and just like a cold, these things do happen. Sometimes it's because of our actions and sometimes it's not. And so I would just caution us all, because many times we're dealing with children, and that could be really scary when you feel as if you may have played a role in something that you absolutely played no role in. So that's that. That said, I have Erin here and Liz and Karen. Each week we continue to watch that data, and I wish it was as simple as being black and white, but it's not. We look at each individual situation that's come our way, and collectively with Dr. Hearn and Ed, Erin, myself, Karen, we make decisions that we believe are in the best interest of the district. Our goal is and continues to be to make sure our children and our faculty are safe, while at the same time keeping schools open as long as possible. I don't know how long that's going to be for, and so for us, every day that we keep our children here in a healthy way feels like, you know, a good day. And so we're going to continue to do that the best that we can. That said, we've asked our families to be flexible and also be planful, because as we know that these decisions have had a quick turnaround. And that may mean that families have to make adjustments very quickly. And so while we apologize for that, we just need folks to understand that that is the situation that we're in. And I wish that these were easy solutions, but they're not. So each week they're complex. We have lots of discussions around them, and then we come to a common agreement on what makes the most sense based on the information that we have at that particular moment in time, which can literally change 2 hours later. So that's basically it. I figured that many of you may have questions that you're hearing from families, and we'll be glad to answer them.
Go ahead, Sean.
Sorry, I should have.
Mr. McAvoy.
I'm just so used to calling
I
on
have
people.
a couple. Just anecdotal evidence. Heard the sports teams are moving to cohort C. Is there a mass exodus to cohort C? What are we seeing? I'm hearing, 2 people in class in some cases.
So I heard for the first time this evening, actually, that students were electing to go to cohort C. I hadn't heard that. So Sean, that'll be something I'll dig into more tomorrow. It's the first that I've heard of it. I understand why children might feel the sense of, okay, let's do this on behalf of the athletic piece or trying to keep one another safe, but school is our priority, and we believe that children learn best when they're in school. And so I don't want to discourage children from taking action, but at the same time, I would discourage children from not coming to school if that's the strategy that they're going to have in place to play sports. And so it's the first I'm hearing of it. I had not heard otherwise, but I will dig into that.
I think it transcends sports, you'll find, but
I'm sorry, Sean.
it transcends the sports kids. I'll just put, my kid moved to cohort C because her classes are empty. So just anecdotal evidence, but yes, please dig into it.
So we will.
Just a follow-up on the data. We talked about the dashboard, I guess we're calling it. It's still not terribly informative. If I look at it, I can't tell per school how many kids are quarantined, how many teachers are quarantined, how many positives we had. The ask is a map, red, yellow, green, make it easy for parents to know what they're looking at. I don't know how many kids are out of quarantine. I don't know how far back on the list to go.
Okay.
Just for clarification, so the ticker, we've been calling it tracker, it reads the school, how many cases, how many staff, and how many students in quarantine, and how long they're in quarantine for. What would be shaped in that data, or how that's presented, other than the colors that would get to?
I'd like a dashboard that says Scotland has this many teachers, this many students currently quarantined,
Okay,
period.
all right.
And that should be updated daily. Right now, I have to go through and do my own math.
The own math. So I think the question and the challenge that so I hear what your question is or your comment is, Sean, and we've heard that before. In fact, informally, Margaret and I were just talking about that just before the board meeting about the tracker and the date of when the quarantine ends. The challenge is sometimes the quarantine date does end differently for different groups, and so articulating that in a clear way is one of the obstacles that we'll have to deal with in giving that information. But I think that could be helpful if you're a Scotts Ridge family and you want to know, when is the school returning? Maybe you didn't see the communication and you just want to look quickly, or perhaps you're making a decision for your family. So we'll figure out a way.
I think it's the third one is if I see things trending from green to yellow and towards red, I want to make decisions.
I think to
Yeah.
Sean's point, it also helps when you know how much staff is out. Does that make, if you have a huge number of staff out, parents can start getting prepared, like, okay, we have 35 or 40 teachers getting quarantined. Does that mean we're going to have a shortage of subs? I mean, it's just planning for future, if that makes sense, I know Scotland had many cases. You got to add up how many staff versus students, I think that's the clarity part. people get confused.
I'm not sure how going back to Liz's question, Sean, I'm not sure how we could integrate colors into this.
Well, my original ask, and I don't want to talk out of turn, it was to, we have guidelines and rules that we've set up that said if we get to X, we move to hybrid. If we get to Y, we go fully remote. That's the red, yellow, green. It's really simple.
It is, except the only difference is that has changed with the revision in addendum 4. And so now it's not, that was cleaner for school districts to make those decisions when it was exactly what you just described, Sean. So that, from a non-medical person, that was easy for me to make a decision. That's no longer the case. And so in fact, many of the cases we've had to navigate in recent days has not fallen within that structure. And so I think that that information would be misrepresented here. That said, I'm hearing you, and I'm hearing you as well, Tina, in terms of being able to communicate so that folks can see the difference between students and staff, perhaps in that ratio, and maybe that's just a separate table that we need to create. The other piece is that important for folks to notice or to note is that not all staff members are created equally in terms of how they impact the school, the day-to-day operations. Some can easily transition into a remote experience, for example, where others cannot, because therefore we need a sub. And so once we need a sub, which has been the challenge for our school district with our 2 middle schools for sure, and quite frankly, most of the districts surrounding us are navigating the same trouble because you just can't find the number of staff. Even if we have staff that can teach remotely, which many of them can because they're quarantined but not ill, the problem is we don't have an adult that can supervise the children so that the specialized adult certified teacher can teach remotely. So that is the increasing barrier that we're having in terms of keeping our schools physically open. Even though in reality, if they're going to have all their teachers remote anyway, being physically in school is somewhat irrelevant. But if we can get them there as much as possible, we want to, obviously. So we'll figure out a way to, there's enough people asking for something different here that we'll figure out a way to make it cleaner.
Ken, did you?
I just had a quick suggestion. So with tackling something like the different students have different quarantine lengths. I mean, it should be, so maybe Scotts Ridge has 3 rows, and it's got 6 students, 14 days, 6 students, 10 days,
Yeah.
8 students. So you're still able to do it with the same amount of clarity. Is it possible from the color perspective to do it by school?
So the colors, they really don't apply now. So they're like, if you look at the new addendum, they're even like blended colors. There's like, it's,
Thank you. All right, no way. Whole rainbow cornucopia.
yeah.
Nora?
I just wanted to add on to what Sean said and what we heard about the athletics. So I have heard from a number of parents that it's not coming from the students, but that they're being told to go to cohort C, which I was quite surprised about. And so that's what I hear.
Anecdotally speaking, I know that in other communities that was from some adults was one of the recommendations. We had not heard that in our community, but for some of the other communities to ensure that things continue to happen outside of the school day, that was a push. I had not heard that at all. So, as I mentioned earlier, that the first time I've heard of that was tonight.
Other board member questions or comments? Go ahead, Sean.
I don't want to monopolize, but we put a lot of effort into the reopening planning. It was a cast of thousands, a lot of heavy lifting over the summer. Have we started to do any work on what does this look like post-pandemic? What do the schools look like? What does the configuration look like? Do we start to tear things down and rebuild? Have we learned any best practices that we need to carry forward from this that should stay in place? I'm just thinking that maybe we need another moonshot type program to look at the real reopening.
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that question. The first part, actually, which is what I thought you may have asked is, have you revised the reopening work that you've done this past summer to reflect what's actually happening? Because I think everything has evolved so much so that I don't even think our work, all that work, is reflective of the changes. And so that is something that we're in the process of doing now, because parents do access our site, and that is where they go when they don't perhaps want to ask me or ask the reopening committee or ask their administrator. They go to those resources. And so those resources need to reflect what's actual. And for anyone that's been following along, if you were to look at the low-risk model, well, none of this applies. None of it matches up. The moderate risk doesn't match up, right? The only one that probably matches up at some point might be that high-risk model, but in theory, it looks like the data almost, right? We're transitioning that way. The first part of what I thought was your question, I just want to put out there, is that we're in the process of clarifying our documents so that they actually memorialize what we're doing now, which has changed. The second part of your question, Sean, in the interest of transparency, no. We're in the process starting to think about budget, and so I'm certainly thinking about, based on everything that I've learned in our community right now, what I could see short-term and long-term in terms of goals. But the learnings from right now and how they would impact our students, I think that's a little bit of a stretch for me at this moment. And let me just give you an example. I was thinking about the kindergarten through second grade in future. Is technology even something that we want our kindergartners in a year from now in the post-pandemic world to be a part of their day-to-day? And if so, why? Is it because of this, or is it because we believe that the skill is as important now as it was pre-pandemic? So there's definitely opportunities to learn and grow, and I think there's opportunities to learn and grow in terms of thinking ahead that we just didn't anticipate until now. I think that there's things about flipped classroom that we've learned from this situation that will give us opportunity for the future. But day to day, Sean, we're still trying to make this current circumstance the best that it can be. And going back to what we heard about our high school students today is, and I'll say it publicly, for those parents that are making the choice for reasons that are outside of the academic, for reasons that are outside of health and safety, I would encourage to send your children to school because they belong in school. That's the best place that they can be. They learn best when they're there. Our teachers can impact them in a far greater way. Again, outside of health and safety or other reasons that are very personal to the family, is that we want our students in school. And in this environment, as much as our efforts have allowed us to do lots of different things, it's allowed for kids to be in quarantine and still access their teacher, one way or the other. It's allowed for families to make their own personal decisions. But this isn't really even a learning environment that is a distance learning environment. It's not created that way. You're streaming into a classroom and you're watching a live classroom. That's what you're watching. So it's very, very different than if, let's say, we were in a full remote model and what that distance learning experience could be. And so as a result, right now, we're still pushing for our kids to be in school every single day, or as many as they can. They can be, because that's where we believe that we can give them the most access to the content. I hope I answered your question, Sean.
As much as you can. I'm just planting a seed that we need to think about post-pandemic and what schools look like.
And hopefully that'll be something.
And I could take, and the blocking and tackling is, we had some structural problems that needed to be solved before this, and some of them got worse, some of them may have mitigated, but we need to maybe start looking at that in the near term.
Ken?
Well, I think to the point you've raised several times is this is an opportunity to start over in some cases, where some things that maybe weren't working as they should prior, we've had in some cases had a chance to reset. And so as we move forward, let's not rebuild what was okay or what wasn't working before. Let's build the newer, better, the optimal. And I think let's take the opportunity to do that because we have it. not necessarily by choice, but it's was given to us, so let's take advantage.
Any other board member questions, comments? Ms. Silva, anything else you wanted to bring up?
You know, the only point, and I think many folks said it tonight, is just a big gracious thank you to the teachers and to the administrators. I mean, some of our administrators are working, some of the ones in this room are working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Really, since the month of March, our faculty has had to flip on a dime without much notice, have had to be incredibly resilient, and are working incredibly hard on behalf of kids. This is a very unique circumstance, and you know, I can tell you that our teachers have been incredibly gracious, and you know, doing the best that they can under very unique circumstances. So, just a big kudos to them and all their hard work.
Agreed. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, which is the enrollment projections. I believe we have Mike Zuba from the London Room here. To present. Hi, Mike. You're on.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me fine.
Yeah.
I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if it has any glitches on it. You all should be able to see the opening title slide.
Yep.
All right, so I'll get right into it. I always enjoy coming to Ridgefield. This time it's just a little bit different. And being virtual, but still have the same presentation, have a lot of the same materials, and I'm going to provide a little bit larger context of what we're seeing across the state in different communities as October 1st enrollment started to come in, and every school, regardless of where you were, what kind of community you were, you had slightly different numbers and different impacts, and we quickly realized as demographers in the planning team that for a lot of our clients, there just wasn't a great repository of some state data there to tell us, you know, what everybody's seeing. So we began pulling together and getting a good understanding of what the issues are and what some of the challenges we're going to face trying to look ahead 10 years. So looking at our projection comparison where we always start, and we always pride ourselves on being under 1% from the actuals when we look back on our projections, and you know, this was a year where we didn't meet that mark, but we wanted to roll up our sleeves and really figure out, you know, where do we have that disconnect, what data can Ridgefield provide that can help us better understand and project forward, as well as what data can we pull together to be able to get a good understanding of what's happening this year, as well as what's likely going to happen for next year, especially as we talk about planning, we talk about budget, understanding that we really don't know where exactly we're going to be, but trying to put the data points together to get there. So as I look at our projection comparison, it was pretty clear, regardless of our models that we looked at, the kindergarten enrollment was lower than we had anticipated. It was much lower than I thought it was going to be when it came in, so that was something that we'll talk a little bit about later on. But also, even within that elementary grade structure, you know, there was some areas there that we were lower than anticipated. The middle school and high school, you know, were fairly on par, especially for our medium and high models, but we wanted to dig in a little bit more to find out what some of those drivers were. So reaching out through the administration, we were able to get some data points, and it wasn't 100% of all data that we typically don't look at and as demographers from year to year, but being able to look at, you know, withdrawals, what that data looked like, where students, were they opting for homeschool, were they going into private kindergarten, were they doing something else and moving out, and we saw that 51% of the opt-outs were choosing homeschooling, and 90% of those were occurring in the grades K through 5. So when we really looked at that individual trend, we wanted to be able to get that data and get a better understanding of how we wanted to be able to model that going forward, so we didn't undershoot next year or overshoot certain grades. And this is just a breakdown of that projection model, which for the last, I believe, 6 or 7 years, we've actually been benchmarking against the high model with great success. And you can see that some of them where we feel like we have a good understanding of the kindergarten and first grade disconnect, we were left a little bit still scratching our heads because a lot of the data didn't line up with where we overshot on the 4th and 5th grade. But overall, the middle school as a 6th-8 grade grouping, that was fairly close with only a deviation of 8, and then the high school was fairly close as well. So one of the toughest challenges I have of all my clients is trying to really get within what we strive for is our 1% of your actual enrollment at your elementary schools, and this year is where we saw some pretty big disconnects there. We saw a big disconnect at Ridgefield, and that was driven across several grade levels as well as at Veterans Park, where we were low there as well across several grade levels. Both of those, when we went through the aggregate of all the homeschooling data and those opt-outs, those, not surprisingly, were the 2 elementary schools that had the greatest number of reports that opted for homeschooling there. But overall, with the K deducted from it, really it was that 4th and 5th grade where we saw some deviation there from what we had anticipated and projected. Looking at the 2 middle schools, both within half dozen students of each other, Stocksbridge was just 2 students below what we had projected, whereas East Ridge was 6 students below what we projected. Now you're really fully into that fully aligned feeder pattern that we were part of that redistricting a number of years ago. So now we're seeing those grades begin to balance out, or at least the schools there balance out the number of students per grade overall. We roll our sleeves up on the factors really impacting the enrollment. Typically, as part of our modeling, especially for our economic and demographically driven and even our housing, we always look at the unemployment rate. Ridgefield has always tracked very well with the county, below the county level, but it's been consistent. Any point in time this summer into the fall, you begin fully local or even regional unemployment levels, that data fluctuates. We stopped including it as far as our 2020 number and just reverted back to the 19 model there, just because it was fluctuating so much throughout the course of the year. Tracking home sales, I talked over and over again about how really in Connecticut and in many of those Durg A and B school districts, it's becoming much more about the real estate market rather than the births within the communities, and that's something that we've identified that trend a number of years ago and it's held steady. Looking at your 2020 estimate, and we have sales from January to August, and what we always do is we take a historic percentage for those last several months of the year, look at the last 5 years, then give up an estimate for the full year. So just under 400 overall, single family at 321. So really on par with that 14-15 window, a little bit higher than what we saw last year, but really fairly flat overall after picking back up in 2013. In talking with the town planner as well as pulling data from DETD, we didn't have any data for 2020. However, in those discussions, we're seeing stronger multifamily development, primarily in Ridgefield Center. These aren't development types that are going to typically lend themselves to young families and school-age children. Single-family housing, at least new starts, has yet to really rebound. We're seeing that throughout Connecticut. There are some communities, though, that are starting to see some more subdivision activity that's being really driven based on the amount of inventory in a community. Part of the housing sales, we look at the housing sales by address. We also geocode or address match student enrollments. We have enrollments dating back through 2010, address mapped as well as housing sales dating back 6 years. So this is where we look at the year to date, so January 1st through September 30th. So some of those are, before Corona, and some of those are really in the heart of the pandemic. But overall, 322 home sales, we address matched. 170 students, based on our analysis, have generated for that. It's a slight drop off of where we were last year, and really the historic average of 0.3, 0.38, 0.39 is what you typically see for sale. This year that number was down to 0.33. But when we took a look back at last year, still that same split was there. Roughly that we saw with the elementary having, 70 students generated the last 2 years. Middle school, about 24 there. We did see a bigger drop off this year than we had in past years for high schoolers generated from home sales. But overall, not a tremendous jump. We weren't sure if we were going to see an increase or a decrease, and this is one of the communities where we saw a decrease in students generated from housing sales. And this is our breakdown overall, and it's pretty on par with what we've seen in the past based on the number of sales, typically the lowest with multiple students coming into Ridgefield Public Schools. And then we have always a good amount, 30 or 40 sales with one student generated attending Ridgefield Public Schools. This was a little higher than normal, probably because we had a few less high schoolers. We're typically around 60%. This year we were at 65% were elementary students, and that was just really a result of the lack of high schoolers. So overall, looking at the trends by sales, which is the table on the right, based on the elementary school attendance zones or the districts there, Barlow Mountain overall had the greatest percentage of sales overall, followed by Branchville. Branchville had picked up a little bit where years prior it wasn't really in the top 2 or 3 this year. Came in at number 2 with Veterans Park at number 3, just on the percentage of total sales. Barlow Mountain Elementary Schools had the greatest number of students generated from those sales, and Branchville Elementary came in second, followed by Ridgeberry. And I should have mentioned on the last slide, this is where we also further see that disconnect with new kindergarten students with parents who buy homes that school year. We were typically averaging around 30 or so kindergartners per year over the last 5 years of our analysis. This year, we saw 20 kindergartners overall generated from those home sales. And Veterans Park had the lowest yield per sale, and that's really just a function of the housing type there around the center. So looking at projected births, and we continue to use a regression-based equation that factors in home sales as well as the unemployment rate lagging it, and then prior births. We were hoping with the census fielding in 2020 that by the fall we would have had some demographic level information available. That looks like it's getting pushed off until probably the spring of 21. We always like to rely on a demographic model, which is a birth model looking at females of childbearing age as well as fertility rates to project births going forward, but we're just in a weird time with that being lagged. Hopefully it doesn't get lagged further, and next year we could have that. But overall, we saw the estimate of births for this year at about 156. And what that is that's reports through the State Department of Public Health. We're able to get that for a partial year and then use the same methodology for our housing sales and extrapolate forward. So that's really kind of on par with 2014 through 2018. We did see for 2019, which we were a little low on initially when we were estimating it last year, as when the final tally came in for the whole calendar year, it was at 180. So we're expecting a larger or an outsized class of kindergartners for that 2024. But going forward, we have a range of anticipated future births. Our high model has it going upwards of 208 births in year 2025. Our medium is at 186, and then our lower pessimistic model is just under 160. One of the things we've been tracking is that relationship between birth decay, and on the next slide I'll talk a little bit about where your kindergarten class comes from. But ultimately, you look back 15, 18 years, you've always had this narrow gap on the red line showing your kindergarten, and then that blue line with your births lagged 5 years. Really, post-Great Recession, we saw the widening of this gap. And as that gap began to widen, that really just showed the current trends of many more kindergartners are not born in a given community, but rather their parents or families move into that community somewhere after they're born between 0 and 5. This is something that we've been seeing across the board. in many of the suburban Connecticut communities. One of the things we noticed this year, especially with the 2021, is that gap narrowed ever so slightly, and that was really just a function of that lower kindergarten class size or class cohort that you experienced. This is where we track that historic share. I think the green and the blue do a really good job of showing it, where way back in 2001, 2002, a large part of your kindergarten enrollment was actually born in your community, and then over time that gap widened, or that share of the stacked bar chart began to level out more and more, where more of it was really driven through immigration, through the housing market and housing starts within your community. So in our efforts to get perfection on kindergarten enrollment, we go through this pretty exhaustive exercise of address matching the kindergartners and looking at your address match births that we get through the Department of Public Health, as well as our matched sales addresses, to be able to try to determine, for really the last several years, what's comprising that kindergarten class, and that's really what we were talking about on the prior two slides. And what we're seeing overall is that about half the kindergartners this year were linked to home sales. That's where we, really further strengthens our break from that reliance of birth and that traditional birth decay alone. And what we saw this year, despite some changes due to the pandemic, was that really the historic percentage, or the share really reflected what we've seen historically, in spite of all the changes that we've gone through as a community, as a state, as a nation, as pretty much the world. But overall, that same pattern has held true, and that really gave us some good input on our models that have been based on a lot of this analysis, as not having to tear apart the model, but rather really look more with scrutinizing lens at our assumptions within the model, and where necessary begin to override some of those areas to be able to have accurate projections. So really kind of mixing in a little bit of the art to the science that we rely so heavily on. So as we dug in at the individual elementary schools, and this is where we had the greatest disconnect, especially at our kindergarten, in trying to explain what we're seeing and trying to look at some of those patterns. I see at Farmingville where we had a large number of them matched to home sales over the last 6 years. That has led to that elevated level there. In Ridgefield, as well as Scotland, we're seeing fewer and fewer, when we look back at the historic share, that are being matched to births there. And that helps explain that smaller kindergarten class sizes, even though that we even out that split of immigration through housing sales as well as births. It's clear that the birth component of that has been less of an influence there on driving the kindergarten enrollment. And then our kindergartners matched to home sales in Veterans Park was much lower than what we've had historically this year overall, where we typically average about 20. This gets us back to where we were in 18-19, for about 11 students, or about 11 kindergartners there. So a much more subdued level at Veterans Park. Really, we're just some different trends across the board that we hadn't seen before, kind of sprung up this year. This is our table of real, cohort survival, or our persistency ratios of, where we're looking at the survivability and our net immigration from year to year. This is where we talk about our birth decay, as well as our progression from one grade to the next. So did you grow, did you shrink? Ridgefield historically, at least since the Great Recession, this is that column on the right, you've been positive in your estimates of migration. So when we take the aggregate of grades 1 through 7 in this school year, and we compare that to the aggregate of grades 2 through 8, say next year, we've typically seen a positive level of growth in those typical stable enrollment cohorts. This year we actually saw a slight decline. Last year we had a little bit less than what we had historically seen the 3 years before, but nonetheless it was still positive. This year we saw a slight loss there. We saw a loss in the 3rd to 4th grade, as well as a 4th to 5th grade progression, where typically those were around 1 or so. So if you had say 100 third graders, and that persistency ratio is 1, you would have 100 fourth graders. We also saw our birth decay drop off a little bit from where it was from the historic level, but still not a tremendous drop off. We think we would have been spot on if we didn't have a lot of those opt-outs, especially the homeschool component of that. If they opted to come in, that number would have more closely reflected on last year's number. As we prepared our projections, typical to what we've been doing really since the last major uncertain time of trying to project enrollment going out 5 and 10 years is the Great Recession. We've been doing since then our low, medium, and high models, with our low model looking at really a slow housing market, slow economy, some subdued births. Our medium model looks at sort of how the stability of the local housing market and economics as well as birth, that trend likely continue. And then the high model has really based around more accelerated home sales as well as more accelerated births, and births having an uptick, as I mentioned earlier, those getting upwards around 200, 210, especially for the years 23, 24, 25. And then one of the other projections is our assumptions are that when we dug into the homeschool data, we had to make some assumptions there around the return of students. So all those homeschoolers that we had in grades 1 through 5, we returned those to their elementary school and progressed them forward. And then for the homeschoolers, for kindergarten, we estimate about 80% of those would return for the 2021 school year as well. So looking ahead, our projections are, not surprising, slightly lower than what we were presenting last year. We're still on that same track where we have the medium and high model are both troughing out around the midpoint, so right around 5 years. With the medium model having a flatter trajectory and the higher model having a slight upwards trend. And then the low model shows a flattening, but then just a very slight continued decline overall. Based on what we're pulling together data-wise and just some general uncertainty on when we do return to normal and what that looks like, we're advising for planning purposes to focus on that medium model this year, especially with the dip in the overall enrollment that we saw, but also for the longer term thinking that from some of the data points we're pulling, especially for Fairfield County with the uptick in immigration there, that also have that high model in the back of your mind, as well as you're thinking out 5+ years. So this is just really a brief look at your historic and current enrollment by grade as well as with birth. The first 5 years of projections in green, and then the last 5 years of the projections in yellow. By grade level and group, I always like to look at the stacked bar chart or kind of a wave, because that gives you a little better understanding of how what's actually contributing to that longer view on enrollment. So starting at the bottom, in blue is our K-5 grades. Overall, we're seeing very stable enrollment there. Overall, projecting 1,880 some students, really for a bulk of the projection horizon. That's going to rise up to around 1,927, 28, and end up with about 1,920 students out in 29 and 30. The middle school enrollment's going to be fairly flat overall. You'll reach your trough over at about 1,000 students with a slight increase in the back half of that projection horizon, but really overall averaging about 1,000 students for grades 6 through 8. The high school is where we're projecting to see that shrinkage, as you can see in the green bar chart. That component of the stacked bar chart is getting smaller and smaller, going from about 1,530 students, ending up around 1,300 students for the last year of our projection horizon. And this is just another way of numerically looking at it, where we always look at our first 5 years, which are the most accurate, and then our second 5 years, which rely on some assumptions, as I talked about earlier, especially at the elementary level when we talk about births, which we don't have yet, as well as the relationship to the local housing market, which going out 5-10 years is really assumption driven. But when we look at our grades 6 through 8, those are largely students in seats. Those are established cohorts moving through, and that's where we begin to lean more heavily on that second 5 years or the last 5 to 10 years of that projection horizon. Looking at your individual elementary schools, overall we're seeing Barlow Mountain, Branchville, and Farmingville projecting those to have a notable positive increase overall from your current enrollment, anywhere from 12 to 12.5 students there. Ridgefield projected to increase 10 students over that first 5 years, and then Scotland Veterans Park to be pretty much flat. And then as we move into that second 5 to 10 year window, that's where we do see one kind of bucking that trend, which is Farmingville is going to experience a slight decline there, only a handful of students. And then in that back half is where we then see a little bit of a shift with Ridgefield, Scotland, and Veterans Park experiencing nominal gains, and Barlow Mountain and Branchville being fairly flat. And that's driven by some of the birth data as well as some of the individual assumptions that we have embedded in the model, as well as the cohorts that are average matched in within our grade groupings there. And this is just out of force of habit. I like to put the spaghetti chart, because some people like to be able to see it that way rather than looking at the individual numeric data itself. So I won't spend much time on it. So with the alignment of the feeder pattern, it was really to balance out the middle school enrollment as well as better align to your desires for your teaming structure there. But it did, exacerbated the enrollment decline at East Ridge and had an increase at Scotts Ridge that, we're now seeing. But when I look at the projections ahead, we're showing that decline at East Ridge to drop down in the first 5 years to just under 480 students, where Scotts Ridge will be upwards of about 550, 540 students there. Going back to the 5 and 10 year models there, we then see Scotts Ridge having a slight uptick, so ending up 2030-31 at about 490 students, and Scotts Ridge is being fairly stable there at about 530 students overall. Looking at our major takeaways for our projections, and we're looking at, across the board, being a little bit more conservative and looking at the medium model, especially with some of the uncertainties out there surrounding our local, regional, and state conditions. The elementary school clearly troughed and bottomed out. As students return, we're expecting that enrollment to grow slowly. There was a clear impact, especially in the kindergarten enrollment. After we put this projection report together, we did see a small release through the press, and the state is dribbling out some data there that they're finally crunching from the October 1st numbers, where it seems to be across the board at the state that there's some lower enrollment than anticipated across statewide kindergarten, as well as some of those lower elementary grade levels. We're seeing a greater level of immigration anticipated for next year as some of those homeschoolers come back into the school system. Stable enrollment overall at the middle school, with enrollment really ranging from high 900s to low 1000s. That change is, we're going to see a little shift from what has historically been the enrollment at the 2 elementary or the 2 middle schools that I talked about. But that's largely an impact of the feeder pattern, as well as the redistricting that's now fully phased in. And then really the high school, as you have those smaller grade cohorts matriculate up out of the elementary through the middle into the high school, you're replacing some larger graduating 12th grade classes with smaller 9th grade classes, and that's really where we're going to be seeing that decline over the next decade. With that, I'd like to thank the board for your time and turn it over to you for any questions, comments, and hear back from you.
Thank you, Mike.
Can I just Mike, just to clarify, because the term red shirt is used several times throughout the presentation, that's not really what we mean in terms of just being clear for the public. on the
Yeah,
last
no,
slide.
that should have been in there. I thought I had caught that. I'll remove that from it. You're correct.
So in other words, the larger class, where it says larger class projected next year, the term red shirt could mean that, could be defined as parents holding their children back to perhaps give them a stronger experience as an older student in kindergarten. That's not really what you mean here, Mike. So
No, it's more so due to the pandemic, and we clearly saw it in the homeschool data numbers there, but I will revise that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, board member questions.
So on that
Jonathan?
very point, the kindergartners that we didn't get to meet this year, do we expect, are they being homeschooled this year as kindergartners and we're going to meet them next year as first graders? Or are we going to have a potentially very large kindergarten class?
Can you hear that, Mike?
It was a little muffled. It was a question about, and I'll just repeat it in, do we expect the kindergartners that are homeschooled to return as kindergartners or first graders next year?
Correct.
Yeah, that's something that we made an assumption on, and we assumed that a larger percentage would return as kindergartners, and I believe it was 80% and 20% would return as first graders. And we didn't have any data behind that, but with the drop in the birth to K, by making that assumption, we felt pretty good about where both the first grade class would land, as well as where the kindergarten class would land. We did assume that all the homeschoolers that were in grades other than kindergarten would then return at the next grade for next year.
Kathleen?
Just to follow on that, are we sure that those kindergartners are all being homeschooled, or are they enrolled in various independent transition kindergarten programs throughout the area in Fairfield County? Therefore, they could either redo kindergarten or go on to first grade. I think that would make a big difference.
Yeah. From the report that I had, there was other students on there that were identified as being part of independent or private programs. We did not include those. These were those that were coded as homeschoolers. I don't know any more background on the individual circumstance of what programmatically they're doing at home. It was just what was provided to me based on the data that we were given.
Tina, I saw your hand.
I think it just follows Kathleen's question. So because you say you're assuming all homeschool students, grades 1 through 5 will come back. But again, there's no way to know if these homeschool students have, at this point in time, gone to private schools, therefore they may not come back. Will that shift? Is that assumption taken? Have we taken the margin of error saying not all homeschool students, grade 1 to 5 come back? Let's say 20% go to private schools.
Mike, can I just clarify in terms of how this information, because when a student goes to a private school, they typically withdraw, let's say grades 1 through 5, they withdraw from our school and are now a part of another school. So that's one type of student. Another type of student is a student that does not come to the public schools and elects to homeschool. But in theory, they are completing that year at home. So if I'm a first grader, I'm going to be home and completing my first grade year at home. Should I return to the public schools, I would be returning as a second grader. And then the other student that's kind of mixed in here, which is kind of the confusing one, is the kindergartner, because in theory, they don't have to come to school yet. But what I think I'm hearing you say is that there are a number of students that could have come to school, were age level, registered, but then elected to homeschool.
Correct. That's the data that we had. I believe we were referencing data points over the summer when we asked for it of who already had registered and then who withdrew or opted out and what was that coded as. So with the kindergarten, they could do either or really depending on what their experience is this current year. And what we wanted to do was to, in taking a look at the number, and I believe there were 32 kindergartners. We did an 80-20 split on that. And part of the reason was that we were trying to be conservative in our assumption, but part of the reason was that we felt that the kindergarten number was a little bit understated, and that we were likely going to see a larger number of kindergartners next year, just due to individual family circumstance as well as move-in, than what the model may have been projecting based on having a subdued persistency ratios for this year.
Other questions? Rachel?
Do we have any inside information from like our pre-K program that maybe children stayed back a year instead of moving forward to kindergarten? That would have an impact for next year?
We do, but that happens every year.
Okay.
So do we have more students than typical? Yes, but the spread across 9 schools is not substantial enough at this point that would have a huge sway, as far as I can tell, and I'm not a statistician. But that is something that we have to build in every year, but I would say, to a previous point, the vast majority of those times, those kids go on to K, not 1.
Thank
But,
you.
change.
Ken, I saw your hand.
I just had it's more of a general question. So if a child is homeschooled for 2nd grade, how do we know that the quality of education that they received in 2nd grade qualifies them for 3rd grade? This is just honest, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're in the process, actually, we just finished up today, actually, just reviewing our protocols here in Ridgefield. We have not identified how we'll move forward, but we assessed ours and the ones within our county. So typically speaking, a student would come in, and if they had completed a year of homeschool, we would then promote that student to 3rd grade. Also, typically, in some school environments, they would assess that student in the summer when they know that the student's returning, to get us in whatever portfolio data they have to assess whether or not the student is prepared to move to 3rd grade. Obviously, there's plenty of research on retention, and so the goal is always to move the student into the grade level where they would belong and then meet them where they are. But it really depends on what that homeschooling experience has been like. So it's dependent on whether or not it was a homeschooling experience that had perhaps an online school experience, or whether or not it was the parent, a tutor. It could be lots of different things. And so the legislation's a little bit less clear on what the curriculum needs to be like and how the parent has to justify that. But what I would suggest is that we have some type of reentry assessment, so at minimum we know how to target our teaching for that child, regardless of the grade level. But a really fair question, and a complicated one.
Yeah, very. I would imagine.
Other board
Yeah,
questions? Go ahead, Mike.
And this is the first time in my 20-year career doing this that I ever looked at homeschool data, but when we saw the holes across the board in some of the different districts and the grade groupings, it was one of the areas where we did small additions in order to be able to sort of balance out those holes. So, if there is a return, we're taking a more conservative approach, and we have the students accounted for, especially knowing that many of our school district clients use this to be able to establish their planning for next year, their budget planning. So we felt it was important to be able to include it in there, but I can't ever recall where we've ever looked at this type of data and built it into our regular methods of projecting.
Thank you. Tina, I saw your hand.
It's really not for Mike, it's just a general comment, is that okay? I was going through the projections, and we can see we're trending lower. But also if you go through per class sizes, right, Barlow Mountain versus Veterans Park, and yes, I understand it's a huge anomaly for whatever reasons. There is there something to be said about maybe looking, and as we look at the budget, maybe not this year, maybe a few years from now, but redistricting, redrawing the lines so that we can balance out the class sizes. And the other reason I bring this up is, Scotts Ridge and Eastridge Middle School, right? Ever since I've been in this district, I've heard that Scotts Ridge has been built for 40% of the middle school children's capacity. Honestly, I don't know what that 40% means. Is it 1,000 middle school kids or is it 1,500? Because there's a difference. But the fact remains is current actual enrollment and projections show Scotts Ridge is way higher than Eastridge, right? So is it going to be? Is Scotts Ridge built to take that stress? Is it going to tax the capacity? Is Scotts Ridge built to handle that kind of load? So do we really, again, future projection, as to Sean's point and Ken's point, as we look forward, do we have to relook at how this is, redistrict? I know people get scared of this word, so please don't send me hate mail, but it's just something to balance out the class sizes and, hopefully equalize what Scotts Ridge and Eastridge was built to do. It's just a comment.
So I've heard the same thing that you've heard about the 40, 60.
Yes.
And those that are on the board probably know what that 1,000 or 1,500, for some reason that 1,000 was always the number in my mind, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's accurate. What I would say though is that based on the capacity that it has right now, I can't imagine that it can sustain much more than that. And we know that from just the process we went through with socially distancing and trying to identify that space. And so whether or not you move the line for Barlow Mountain, Scotland, and Ridgebury, some streets should, and I don't know the geographics as well as I'm sure all of you do, at some point, if the projections are accurate, you're going to be over that line and it's going to become tighter and tighter at Scotts Ridge.
I agree. The first thing I thought of is class size. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, no, just the way that the lines were originally designed, because when Scotts Ridge was built, it was built 40% less than East Ridge. So it was not meant to have a 50-50 aligned feeder pattern. So it was Branchville, Farmingville, and VP to East Ridge. But then there was a split for Barlow and Scotland to East Ridge with a Ridgebury fully to Scotts Ridge. So it would remain balanced at the middle schools for the feeder patterns. But that changed, I want to say 4 years ago, because we're now in our first year of the aligned feeder pattern, to make it 50-50, which it was not originally designed to do. So both Barlow and Scotland had some students that went to East Ridge and some students that went to Scotts Ridge.
Thank you. Kathleen?
No, it's just, that's the first thing that popped, because I know that Scotts Ridge right now, if the capacity isn't there, that means the class size goes up. And it looks, it's quite many, so I think it's something we really have to look at carefully. I'm not proposing how we do it right now, but I think that's a real red flag.
I agree. I think this has been something that the board has been looking at for the past couple of years, so it isn't new to us to know to take a look there, but I think it's what 2024 is when it really starts to go away. So we probably need to.
We'll need to look at perhaps just redrawing the lines for Barlow, Scotland, to cut some of those lower areas of those two down into the lower schools that feed into Eastern.
I mean, you were there, right? I know why they were done. The reason 50-50 was done, because there were some kids from Barlow Mountain who were 5th grade and they were split, and parents felt very strongly that it was not fair that they kind of grew up together and Ridgebury. So I get the reason for it, but I think as the projections are showing and the current enrollment is showing, I think you're right. We have to relook maybe.
Right. And I think what we're talking about is not going back to the days where a Barlow class is split in Scotland. I don't think we're saying that. We're actually saying reline.
Right.
Yeah,
so it still feeds
where
fully.
the kids go
So it starts at the elementary level?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
And ideally at the kindergarten level.
Yes.
Yes.
that they're-
So if you're thinking 2024 though,
Right, it's
That's
not that
history.
far.
well,
No.
No, it's-
No, it doesn't.
it's now.
Oh, yeah.
Any other board questions about that particular topic with the middle schools and the feeder pattern? Okay, any other board questions about any element of the projections update? I gotta say, I was surprised to hear, I mean, I know that out-migration is because of the homeschooling, but I was surprised to see on the home sales, because I'm seeing a lot of extra babies around town, so it felt weird to me seeing this data, because it didn't necessarily match with what I've heard anecdotally, so I just wonder if we've captured all the non-students, the younger than students in this data. And again, it's just something to keep our eyes on. It weird to be able to project things this year. It's just an outlier year. Anything else, board members? Okay, thank you, Mike. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mike.
Moving on to the next agenda item, the high school commencement date. Under policy 5123.3, the date of graduation ceremonies is approved by the board upon recommendation of the high school principal. So that's why this has come to us. Dr. De Silva, I don't know if you have anything.
Not really, but Dr. Greenwood had, and the school has been discussing the dates with Western, as we all know, that we use their facility and they're gracious enough to allow us to do so. And so we do have to navigate what's available, and so we have our date, which feels good to have one, and hopefully we'll have one on June 11th. Dr. Greenwood couldn't be here tonight. It's his daughter's birthday, and he is celebrating with her in a very small way in COVID, but we're giving him the opportunity to do so.
Any board member questions? I wondered, I mean, I know we go by what's available with WestCon in terms of the date. It feels like a week earlier than it typically is. So and I don't know that we necessarily have a choice, but I do recall a year where graduation happened before the last day of school, and especially for those seniors, you know, and trying to finish out I don't know what our spring will look like here, but trying to finish out the internships and just a little bit of challenge at the end of the year, I think, for the high school to manage having kids who have already gone through graduation ceremonies still fulfill the graduation requirements over the next few days.
So depending, and we did have a discussion about it tonight, I actually held onto it for a little bit, but depending upon where we are with snow days, I think we should be okay. This is exactly 181 days.
Okay.
So it allows kids to fulfill the year. Should our snow days end up being all remote, then we shouldn't have an issue with that.
So this is on the calendar, like, I think our plan for, without any snow days, our plan for last day is the 10th, right? Is that
It is
June
the
10th?
10th, June 10th.
Okay. So this is for one day.
And this is assuming that everything goes well and we're able to have an in-person graduation. Otherwise, I know we did what we did last year, which.
I am going to, yes.
Yes.
Definitely, we're gonna have a graduation.
Oh, of course, we have a
In person, yes.
Which I don't have a crystal ball.
No, but yes.
So this date
Jonathan?
works if snow days are able to be held remote. What if we have power days,
Power days.
tree days?
That's right. That may end up being a challenge, and so that might mean that we have commencement and then students return.
Ken, did you have your hand up?
I was just gonna say, this is 2020, so we will have those power days. That's the one thing that's consistent this year is.
So it might mean that students do have to return.
Except the senior class, by then, is usually in their internship.
They're in
So it's not as dire.
Yeah, the dates of
That is true.
internship
Yeah.
also play into this.
What's that?
The dates of internship,
Yes.
the length of internship, the dates of internship, so, I don't know that the answer to that is for sure that they would come back.
So it did happen a few years ago. My son happened to be a senior year that happened. So I do remember they actually had to go to their internships the Monday and Tuesday after graduation, which you can imagine, I mean, how that,
100%
yeah, how that went.
attendance,
But I
I'm
just,
sure.
I bring it up only because it has happened before. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, right? Just as something to consider. All right, are we ready to make a motion regarding the commencement date?
I move that the Board of Education approve Friday, June 11th, 2021 as the date of the Ridgefield High School class of 2021 commencement.
Do I have a second? Ken? Any more discussion or comments? All right, let's vote. All those in favor of June 11th as our commencement date, please raise your hand. That's 8. Okay, passes. Yes, thank you.
7.5.
Exactly. Okay, next is, the first read of policy 4118.22, which is the Personnel Code of Ethics. As I said, first read. This one comes to the board tonight. This was brought to the policy committee in our last meeting, and policy committee members, please feel free to chime in. But the reason it came to us and is now coming to the full board is our attorneys recommended a change to our existing policy, which was only like 2 sentences long. They recommended a change to set the expectations for personnel of their expected conduct. So in the committee, some of the questions were around who and how to address the employer. Who actually employs, is it the district? Is it the Board of Education? Because it's referenced here as the board. We did a little bit more research on that to address the committee's questions. It actually is the board for 2 reasons. Our collective bargaining agreements are between the board and the units. And then the second thing, and probably most importantly, is by state statute, section 10-220, which outlines the duties of the boards of education. Each local or regional board of education, shall employ and dismiss the teachers of the schools of such districts subject to the provisions of these other sections. So it is the board that is the employer. Just want to let you know, we check that. There were some other just small modifications, which you can see in the red line version. So that, I don't know if policy committee members have anything else to add to that. If board members have any questions, this will come back to us for a second read. Go ahead, Ken.
Just for the parenthetical in the third, the last line of the third, it should be for example, for athletes participating, either before or after.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. All right, so this one will probably come back to us for a second read in our next meeting with that change. Okay, the next agenda item on here is policy 4118.237, use of face coverings in school. This is as a second read. As you know, this was suggested as part of the COVID-19 temporary policy packet. It was a model policy developed by Shipman and Goodwin. This came to the board in our last meeting, or maybe the meeting before that. But anyway, it was sent back to the committee because there were some questions raised in our last Board of Education meeting. Specifically, those questions, I'll outline them here. One was that the policy as written is overly broad in terms of changes being able to be implemented without Board of Ed approval. That was one of the concerns brought up by a board member in our last meeting. The second was that the policy referenced school events, not excluding those taking place virtually or at locations other than RPS. So the committee spoke about both of those. I don't know if any of the committee members would like to elaborate on where the committee discussion went. Ken, Laura, or? So the committee, I believe, decided not to make any changes to the existing policy. We felt that it was not overly broad as written because it gave the implementation power appropriately to the superintendent as it was. We don't want the board to have to come back together to make a lot of those decisions that are rightfully those that the superintendent will make from an operational standpoint. And then the other comment. was, oh, no, sorry, my memo was mixed up here. The other comment about referring to school events, I believe that the committee members decided that we did not need to make a change there because it was clear that, it didn't cover some of those other activities that were brought up as a concern at the last board meeting. Go ahead, Sean.
Paragraph 3, all individuals participating in or attending any school-sponsored activity must wear appropriate face covering, whether or not those activities occur in a school building. Most after-school clubs are now virtual. This is very clear that they gotta wear a mask on a Zoom session. Or have I misread that?
So that would be covered, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
This is Ken. That would be covered by unless an applicable exception applies. So if you're in your own home, then that would be the exception.
Put that in writing.
It is right there. Unless
No, it says.
Just like for athletes participating.
But Ken, who decides there's an applicable exception? Where is that in writing? And how does the student know that?
So we're going beyond common sense and
This
explicit.
policy is very clear.
Right, unless an applicable exception applies.
Jonathan, I think I saw your hand.
I'm good with it as written.
Thank you. One piece that we did add up above to kind of help with that as well is we added in, again, about the guidelines that, that these decisions are made under the guidelines of the, as we said, the State Department of Education, and then we added in the State Department of Health. So that was also clear that there are some overarching guidelines that help to guide this in that decision making. And that would help with what the exceptions are. Sean, go ahead.
What's the resistance to clarifying that simple one? I don't understand. This very clearly says on a Zoom session for an after-school club, I gotta wear a mask. There's nothing that says in writing, you don't. In fact, it affirmatively says you do. What is the resistance to clarifying that?
I believe I've heard other board members say that unless an applicable exception applies is what covers that.
So can we put that exception codified in writing? Because it's very clear right now as written.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I think, Sean, to your point, I believe that what you're looking for is really not part of the policy, but the regulations that are covered in this paragraph below that. And so that would be a regulation, or not part of the policy itself, but the protocol and policies.
Will we have something in writing for these clubs from the superintendent, because that's what's required to clarify that? We're making more work here than I think we need to. What is the resistance to clarifying a very, very simple statement that's very clear?
So then why wouldn't we also include when you're attending class at home in a Zoom session?
Because actually classes would be covered by this, but it says whether or not they're in a school building. We're very clear here in this policy. What's the reluctance to make sure we are saying what we think we're saying?
I think because there may be some other kind of situation, I can't come up with it now, and you begin to list
Athletics.
how many different things do you need.
I'm
to
asking
list.
for one. You're in your house.
So you're just saying for when one is in their house?
Yep.
What if the club meets at your house?
Well, actually, so I was going to ask that question out loud, was not just clubs, but even faculty. Sometimes they're in the same room on a Zoom, and we would be expecting them to maintain their distance and wear their mask. Whereas if I was alone in my office, I wouldn't need to. And so it's assumed that when I'm alone, I don't have to wear my mask. But if I'm in a situation where I'm with somebody else, then the rule would apply, that I would have to follow the rule that says appropriate face covering.
But
Unless
that's
the exception, and the exception is really if you're alone, right?
That's not how this reads, though.
But again,
All students.
the regulations, I think, is where that would be clarified, and the regulations are written by the operational head of the district, the superintendent, rather than, I think what Kathleen is saying, that if we start to put in too much specificity into the policy, then the Board of Education needs to come back together each time any of those new situations comes up versus giving some of that latitude to the superintendent. Go ahead, Sean.
Do we have that regulation that the superintendent has in writing?
Currently, Dr. DeSilva, you said currently
It's in our
the
reopening plan identifies what we're expecting. I mean, is it so specific to say what Sean is describing? If you're in a Zoom at home, you don't need to wear a mask? I don't think we have anything in any of our,
And that wouldn't cover it either. If you're at home in a Zoom in class and you don't have anybody else in the room with you,
right.
right? And so I think you're getting very, very minute.
We're getting minute, but this is very, very broad and very specific.
How is it very broad and very specific?
All individuals, whether or not they're in a school building, you wear a mask, period, full stop. Very broad and very specific. I'm asking for clarity, that's all.
And again, I think that what I'm hearing board members say is that clarity comes in the regulations to implement this policy. So
They come in regulations that we just heard don't exist.
Go ahead, Ken.
Can we move to vote on the policy as written?
Agreed. Yes, we can. So do I have a motion regarding moving on the policy?
I move that the Board of Education approve the temporary COVID-19 policy for use of face coverings in school.
Do I have a second? Jonathan. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the policy as written, please raise your hand. 7. All those opposed? All those abstaining? 1 abstention, Sean. Thank you, so that policy passes. All right, moving on to the next agenda item, which is correspondence to the board. Public comment, Rachel?
So unfortunately, we did have one public comment. It says Caroline Damkowski, 300 Nod Road. However, the public comment is blank. So if they would like to maybe email the Board of Education, maybe it didn't submit properly.
That's a good idea.
You know, please feel free to do that. We'd love to have your feedback.
Thank you.
And then the correspondence report. We have had 13 emails since our last regular Board of Education meeting. 10 of those emails were regarding the shift in learning models and which occurred on 10/27. One email provided information on a free webinar. One email provided feedback on weather-related closures as remote learning days. And one email provided feedback on the COVID-19 communication letters.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is to convene an executive session. Rachel, do I have a motion?
Sure. I move that the Board of Education convene an executive session to review attorney-client privilege communication regarding first student's bus contract and inviting Dr. DeSilva, Dawn Norton, Dr. Hanaway, and Karen Dewing into the session.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Kathleen? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that's 8.